Welcome to the Hispanic History Channel. I hope you enjoy these 3 stories.
3 names silenced by history. One crossed the ocean, another walked among corpses, and one chose to burn.
That Spaniard came like a wounded dog. But he endured more than any of us.
Don Juan Garrido didn't speak much. But we all knew he was a soldier, and that wherever he stepped, something new was born.
La Fraila didn't scream, didn't ask for justice. She just waited. And when the time came, they all burned with her.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's get started.
Here is the story of the African conquistador Juan Garrido.
Mexico City, 1538. An older man with a weathered face and hands hardened by work sits down to dictate a letter. It is addressed to the king. He does not demand honors, he does not ask for riches. It merely recalls. He says he has served in many places and wars of this new Spain, and in every line he defends what he was.
Soldado.
Soldier, sour of wheat, free man, and African. That man's name was Juan Garrido, and no one like him represents the real complexity of the Hispanic world of the 16th century. He lived on 3 continents, fought under 3 governors, survived battles, jungles, journeys without a map, and left his mark on the land and in history. But he wasn't included in the books. He doesn't have any statues. No one mentions him when they talk about Cortez, about the conquest, about Spanish America. And yet he was there. On the front line, his story is not one of slavery, nor redemption, nor victimhood. It's a story of action, decision, and conquest. Garrido was not dragged by history, he wrote it. And this video is going to tell it to you like never before. Welcome to the Hispanic History Channel. But to understand it, we have to go back to the beginning, to a point on the map where there were no cities or cathedrals, where men set out with faith, with hunger, and with weapons. West Africa, late 15th century. He was born around 1480 in a region of the Gulf of Guinea, where local trade networks had already been operating for centuries, and where the Portuguese were beginning to make their presence felt through enclaves, trade, and baptisms. Lisbon at that time was not only a port for slaves, but also a place of opportunity for certain Africans. Men who, once baptized and educated, could serve in noble households, enlist in the galleys, or even enter the service of the crown overseas. Garrido was one of them. He was a Christian African who integrated into the Iberian imperial order, and from within chose to seek his fortune on the other side of the ocean. Around 1502, he set sail for Hispaniola, an island not yet fully established, recently reorganized by Nicolas de Obando after the fall of Columbus's administration. There, in Santo Domingo, he begins his life in the Americas. The Caribbean at the beginning of the 16th century was a hive of activity. In the new towns founded by the Castilians, soldiers, friars, merchants, artisans, interpreters, and frontiermen like Juan Garrido lived together. In that context, Garrido began to stand out as a man-at-arms. He enlisted with Juan Ponce de Leon, first in the settlement campaign in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and later in the expedition to the Florida Peninsula. Those years are key. He learns to survive in unknown lands, to march with discipline, to understand the logic of conquest. He is part of the first groups that build churches. They lay out towns, organize defenses, and build roads. He does it as a recognized soldier, as a free man who serves the crown with body and soul. And that will be recorded years later when he himself leaves a written record of all those services. At that point in his life, Garrido is already a veteran. He has spent at least 15 years in the Indies. He has traveled, fought, and become a man of the frontier. He has raised crosses and fired arquebuses, but the most decisive moment is still ahead of him. In 1519, he hears about a new venture. A group of armed men is preparing in Cuba to venture onto the mainland. They are seeking wealth and fame, and their captain's name is Hernán Cortés. Hernán Cortés is organizing a different kind of expedition. It's not to establish towns on known islands, nor to build churches on mapped coasts. It's to venture into the unknown, an immense, rich, dense land that no one in the expedition can fully imagine. They speak of enormous cities, of gold, of gods, and of empires. Hernán Cortés has gathered his people, and Juan Garrido joins without hesitation. The expedition lands on the Gulf Coast. They found Villa Rica de la Vera, Veracruz, and from there the march towards the interior begins. Garrido is not a novice. He has scars, experience, and stories. He doesn't hide where he comes from, and he doesn't owe anyone an explanation. He is just one more among the soldiers, equal in pay, equal in faith, equal in fire. During the march, they cross Tlaxcala, face the people of Cholula, and finally arrive at the heart of the Mexica Empire, Tenochtitlan. A city of canals, causeways, towering temples, and crowds. For many, it's the first time they've seen a city so colossal. But not for Garrido. He looks at it with a strategist's eye. He's there to fight, to resist, to survive. The first encounters go wrong. The balance between diplomacy, military pressure, and religious tension is broken. In May 1520, during the absence of Cortés and under the command of Pedro de Alvarado, the massacre at the Templo Mayor takes place, where the Aztec nobility falls. Cortés brings Pedro to justice, but it's already too late. The city erupts. Cortés, Garrido, and the rest must flee. On the night of June 30th, under heavy rain, they cross the canals amid arrows, stones, and knives. It is the sad night. Many die, but Garrido survives. The counterattack begins. They reorganize, build brigantines, and with the firm support of Tlaxcala and other peoples who are enemies of Mexica power, Cortés organizes the final siege. Tenochtitlan falls in August of 1521. It has been a long, cruel, harsh war without glory. But the city is no longer Mexica. It is Mexico City, and that's where Juan Garrido decides to stay. He doesn't return to Castile. He doesn't ask for titles. He stays because he understands that the real conquest begins after the war. He gets a plot of land. He works the land. He gets married. He becomes part of the urban structure that is being built over the Mexica ruins. And there, in the middle of that new world, he does something that no one else has done before. He plants wheat. The grains had arrived in the saddlebags of some soldier. Just 3 seeds. Garrido plants them carefully in fertile soil near the Franciscan convent. He waters, observes, and waits. And the miracle happens. The wheat sprouts. For the first time in history, the cereal that would become the basis of bread sprouts in America. Garrido's planting is not just an agricultural act. It's a foundational gesture. Without the need for weapons, he leaves a mark more lasting than gunpowder. In addition to being a farmer, he takes part in the construction of the San Hipólito Chapel, built in memory of those who fell during the capture of the city. That chapel will be a place for mass, for remembrance, and for identity. He is not seeking fame. He is working, building, leaving a physical legacy on the earth. He is not a nobleman, he is not a chronicler, but he is present at every key moment. His story is not one of sudden flashes. It is about depth, roots, and permanence. And it is not over yet, because Garrido will still serve in new campaigns and still has something to say to the king. In the years following the conquest, Garrido held public offices in Mexico City. He was a town crier, doorman of the city council, and caretaker of the Chapultepec aqueduct. He worked to keep the new city standing. He didn't live in a palace, but he was at the center of everything that mattered. He was a respected resident. He married a Spanish woman, Francisca Ramirez. He had children and raised a family under the same sky where Tenochtitlan once stood. He kept marching with his sword when needed. He took part in campaigns toward Michoacan and Zacatula, and later on, he joined the expedition to the Baja California Peninsula, together with Cortés himself. He didn't do it for glory. He did it because it was all he knew how to do. But he also knew that service, if it isn't put on record, doesn't exist. And that's why, in 1538, he writes to the king. He does it like real veterans did. No embellishments, no tears. He reminds Emperor Charles that he has been part of the conquest of this new Spain from the very beginning, that he has served with weapons and with his own hands, both in war and in peace. He reminds him of his wheat planting, his continuous work, his campaigns. With humility, he asks for what is fair, so that he is not forgotten, so that he is recognized, so that he is heard. That letter is his testament, the only document in his own words. There is nothing else. The rest was covered by dust. It wasn't included in the accounts of Bernal Diaz. Official chroniclers did not mention it. His name disappeared from the books for centuries, buried in the archives, ignored by historians, unknown to teachers and students. He was a shadow in the memory of the empire. And yet his trace is still alive. Every stalk of wheat that grows in Mexico carries his legacy. Every brick laid in the first chapel of San Hipólito speaks of his hands. He didn't need a statue or a square named after him. His story is in the land, in the wheat, in the water that ran through the canals he watched over. In recent years, his name has started to resurface. Researchers from America, Spain, and the Afro-descendant world have restored him to history, not as a forced symbol, but as a clear example that the Spanish monarchy was neither uniform nor simple. It was a world of many faces, accents, and colors. And Juan Garrido was one of those men who made it possible. He was a soldier, he was a Christian, he was a sower, and he was part of our history. The next time someone tells you that the conquest was only the story of a handful of people, remind them that Juan Garrido crossed 3 worlds with his head held high, and he left his mark on all of them.
In the next video, we will hear the story of Francisco de Cuéllar, the Spanish castaway.
Francisco de Cuéllar woke up covered in mud. The water was lapping at his feet. The tide was rising. He didn't know where he was. Everything hurt. He couldn't remember if he had swum or if the sea had spat him out like debris. The only thing he knew was that he was alive. Alive, alone, and surrounded by corpses. A few meters away, the broken mast of his galleon. Beyond that, a half-sunken cannon. Pieces of wood, ropes, barrels, and bodies. Bodies tangled in seaweed. Headless bodies. Bodies with their eyes open, looking at the sky as if still waiting for an answer. It was Ireland, but he didn't know it yet. A few days earlier, he was an infantry captain of the Spanish Armada, the largest naval deployment in the history of Spain. He had set out from Lisbon in the name of God, the King, and the faith. They were going to punish England for heresy, to avenge the death of Mary Stuart, to restore Catholicism on the rebellious island. They weren't pirates. They weren't invaders. They were soldiers, crusaders, elite tercios, Navy sailors, nobles in polished armor, and men of faith with rosaries around their necks. But the sea doesn't care about just causes. First came the winds, then the currents. Afterwards, hunger, scurvy, and torn sails. And in the end, the rout. The Armada was not defeated by England. It was devoured by the ocean. Francisco was aboard the Labia, a strong, heavy, proud galleon, but even it couldn't withstand the fury of the Atlantic. The storm pushed it against the reefs of the northern coast of Ireland. The keel broke. The ship burst open like a pomegranate. Cuéllar fell into the water surrounded by fire, screams, and splintered wood. And then nothing. Now he was there, lying on the sand, soaked. Alone? In the distance, barking. Voices. Someone was approaching. Local people. But friends or enemies? Cuéllar rolled over and crawled to a ditch. He covered himself with seaweed, mud, and anything he could find. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. He could only think, and thinking hurt. He had heard about Ireland, a poor wild land divided by clans invaded by the English. Some said it was a sister land, Catholic, an ally. Others said that no one there could be trusted. That day, he didn't know who saw him, but they didn't turn him in. The hours went by, then the days. He crawled along the coast like a wounded animal. He slept in ruins. He drank from puddles. He ate roots. The mud stuck to his skin. His feet cracked. Once he stole a piece of bread from a stable. Another time, a child left him milk by a stone. He didn't know if it was an act of faith or compassion. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He had no one to talk to. He saw castles in ruins, half-collapsed towers, burned crosses, empty villages. He walked at night. He hid during the day. If he heard horses, he threw himself to the ground. If he heard footsteps, he buried himself under branches. He was no longer a captain. He was a wreck, a ghost. One day he saw something in a field, an English banner, and next to it a gallows. 3 men were hanging from it. One of them was still moving. Cuéllar understood that he no longer wanted to be a soldier. They targeted him for being Spanish. He thought about surrendering, about shouting, about ending it quickly. Yet something urged him to continue, to hold on, that he wasn't dead yet. He had been in many battles. He had seen his companions die by spear, by musket, by hunger. But this was different. That wasn't war. It was flight. It was silence. It was cold in his bones. One night he dreamed he was back on the Labia, in his cabin, writing letters. Then he woke up in the middle of the field, covered in frost, with a mouse eating the crumbs from his pocket. The clothes were no longer clothes. They were just rags. The soul was no longer a soul. It was instinct. And even so, he was not alone. In a village, he found another like him, another Spaniard, bruised with a beard down to his chest without boots. They looked at each other without hugging. They didn't say anything. They just shared the fire and a silence that was worth more than any prayer. Ireland was not a refuge. It was another battlefield, except there were no banners or bugles, only mud, wind, and knives. Francisco de Cuéllar walked aimlessly for days. Some watched him from afar. Others spat at him. One struck him with a stick and yelled things he didn't understand. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know if he was English, Scottish, Spanish, or a demon. They only saw a dirty man with a beard in rags who smelled of salt and death. Some, however, offered him bread. Bread as hard as stone. Muddy water, blanket. She learned quickly not to make noise. Speak as little as possible. Keep quiet as much as possible. Language was a prison. I didn't understand anything. Only gestures, glances, fingers pointing at the horizon. Everything seemed to tell him the same thing. Keep going. Don't stay here. He crossed entire forests without seeing a soul. He walked along dirt roads that crumbled beneath his feet. He stepped onto battlefields where it still smelled of gunpowder. In a village, he saw a scene he would never forget. A woman covered in rags, crying in the middle of an empty street. She was holding something wrapped in a cloth. It was a child, dead. 2 dogs were sniffing her feet. No one came out to help her. No one said a word. Cuéllar walked past, not because he didn't feel anything, but because he had nothing left to give. Winter fell upon him like a crushing weight. There wasn't enough of a fire. There was no food. Then he found something unexpected, a castle, or what was left of it. Stone blackened by fire, roofless towers, a Gaelic flag waving in the wind. There for the first time someone spoke to him in Spanish, clumsy, mixed with Latin. A friar, fat, with a face full of scars. He asked if he had come from the south. Cuéllar just nodded. Another one, said the friar. Everyone who arrives has that look, the look of the already dead. There, in that castle, other Spaniards lived. 8 of them. No one knew how they had arrived. They only knew that the clan that took them in, the McClancy, hated the English more than their own misfortunes. Francisco stayed with them. He had nowhere else to go. He learned to sharpen knives, to sleep with one eye open. The English, knowing this, sent 1,700 men to the castle. The clan lord fled, but Francisco stayed along with the other Spaniards. The English besieged the castle, hanging 2 Spaniards in front of them as a warning, but they did not give in. After several days, and because of a storm, they had to lift the siege. The lord of the castle offered gifts upon his return, but the Spaniards refused everything. One of the Irishmen looked at Francisco and said something in his language that the friar later translated. He says, "You're a skinny dog, but fierce as a wolf." Days later, the Spaniards went north, where they met the Bishop of Derry. The bishop was helping the Spaniards cross over to Scotland. After a week, he managed to land on Scottish soil. He lived among cold walls with men who did not speak his language. He ate moldy bread. He prayed when he remembered. The only thing he kept intact was his memory. Everything else, the uniform, the rank, the pride, had rotted away with the humidity. Some days it rained nonstop. Other days, the fog was so thick you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. And when the wind changed, news would arrive. More men captured, more villages destroyed. England kept hunting Spaniards as if they were vermin. 8 months had passed since the sea spat him out on that cursed beach. 8 months among mud, hunger, and death. 8 months without a flag, without order, without a map. Only days that kept repeating. Only cold. Only the memory of a life that seemed to belong to someone else. One afternoon he saw a different man. He was neither Gaelic nor English. He spoke rough Spanish, full of Flemish expressions. He was traveling with a small group of traders. He brought them good news. The Duke of Parma moved heaven and earth and secured them passage to Flanders, but the journey would be very dangerous. The ship was setting sail in 2 days. Cuéllar didn't hesitate. He said goodbye without words. 2 sunrises later, He felt the creaking of the wood under his feet again, the smell of salt air, the fear of the waves. But I was no longer a castaway. I was a passenger. But life is often not fair. The Dutch were waiting on the coast. Cuéllar's ship sank. Many Spanish survivors from Ireland and Scotland drowned or were captured, where they were later executed. Cuéllar, by luck, fate, or divine intervention, managed to save himself once again. He arrived in Dunkirk with only a shirt on. He was finally safe. No one knew who he was. No one was expecting him. No one asked about him. One more soldier who didn't die, a man who survived out of stubbornness, not because of fate. So he did the only thing he could do. He wrote, not a war report, not a cold statement. He wrote a letter, long, detailed, personal, a confession. She sent it to King Philip II. She told him about the disaster, about the sea, about the storm, about the shipwreck, about the pursuit. He told her every step in Ireland, the castles, the clans, poverty, faith, hunger, the cold. He told her about the peasants who shared their bread, about the English soldiers who hung bodies as a warning, about the men who died unable to scream, and about those who screamed until the end. He didn't ask for glory. He didn't demand medals. He just wanted someone to know the truth. Because no one in Madrid, Valladolid, or Seville could imagine what that had been like. No one knew that in Ireland the Spanish were hunted like dogs. That good Irishman, at the cost of their own lives, saved Spanish lives. That the few who survived did so not by strength, but by instinct. That what hurt the most was not the body, but the indifference. That letter, written with desperation and pride, survived the centuries. And thanks to it, today we know what he went through. Captain Cuéllar will serve in the army of Philip II under the command of Alexander Farnese during the following years. Between 1589 and 1598, he takes part in the relief of Paris and in 9 other campaigns where he would distinguish himself. In 1600, he will go to Naples together with the Viceroy Fernando Ruiz de Castro, Count of Lemos. In 1601, he will be appointed infantry captain on one of the galleons bound for the Windward Islands, now known as the Antilles. However, it won't be until 1602 that he will set sail for the Indies with the galleon fleet of Don Luis Fernandez de Cordoba. It seems that these were the captain's last military campaigns. Between 1603 and 1606, he will reside in Madrid while waiting for new assignments. His story was never taught in schools. It was written with the blood still fresh, with the soul still dirty with mud, where it's enough to understand that the Felicissima Armada was not a defeat. It was a journey. It was a failed crusade. Yes, but it was also the stage where thousands of men showed that faith, dignity, and resilience don't always wear a uniform. Cuéllar survived in a world that wanted him dead. He walked alone. He hid. He fell apart, but he didn't give up. And that, even if the history books don't celebrate it, is the history of Spain. Because sometimes you don't need to win to leave a mark. Sometimes just by not dying, you've already won. And Francisco de Cuéllar won. The Lord of Clan McClancy was executed as a traitor in London in 1590, accused of helping the survivors of the Armada. Nothing is known about the place where Captain Cuéllar died, or whether he had any descendants. Now it's time to enjoy the sad story of La Fraila. Castile is burning. It's not a metaphor. It's really burning. It burns on the roads, in the houses, in the souls. It burns with gunpowder, with hatred, with dignity. It's 1808 and Napoleon has invaded Spain. Madrid has risen up. Zaragoza is resisting tooth and nail, and the war, that monster that devours everything, has broken out across the entire peninsula. In La Mancha, there are no defined fronts or organized armies. Here, they strike without warning. The invader is ambushed. People survive however they can. Here, the war is not fought by generals. It's fought by the people. The French columns cross La Mancha like blades. They enter towns where they don't understand the language or the looks. They loot, shoot, and humiliate. There are no rules. Every act of resistance is paid for with blood. And every drop of blood spilled ignites another spark on the plain. Every burned house, every Spaniard dishonored and killed creates a new enemy for the French Empire. An invisible, stubborn enemy, willing to kill them one by one in their own way. People take to the hills. The day laborer who was harvesting wheat yesterday is now a rifleman. The shepherd who knew the river's fords is now leading a group of ambushers. The priest hides gunpowder under the altar. The old woman in the village records troop movements. The boy carries a hidden message in the sole of his shoe. There are no neutrals here. You either fight or you die. That's how guerrilla fighters are born. Not soldiers, but avengers. Tough men, poor, with hatred in their guts and courage in their hearts. They are few, poorly armed, but fast, cunning, relentless, relentless. There are many in La Mancha, but one stands out above the rest. A name that makes French officers tremble when they hear it whispered in taverns or on the roads. Francisco Abad Moreno, nicknamed El Chaleco. Shepherd by day, smuggler by night, full-time guerrilla. Son of the land, familiar with every path, every cave, every farmhouse. He can't read or write, but he knows how to kill. He knows when to attack and when to disappear. He ambushes convoys, steals weapons, frees prisoners, and brings traitors to justice. The French are looking for him, but they never catch him. And with him a young man, Juan Ramon. He's only 20 years old, a native of Valdepeñas. Only son of an elderly woman who takes care of the chapel of Our Lady of Consolation. Widow, religious, quiet. Everyone knows her as La Fraila. If you think this story deserves to be remembered, subscribe and share this video. Let's not let our people fall into oblivion. She lives alone, among saints and candles, taking care of her church and praying for her son, who went off to join the guerrillas like so many others. Juan Ramon joined Chaleco's group after seeing a French detachment execute 3 men from the village for suspecting they were hiding weapons. Chaleco took a liking to him. He was a good shooter, a good tracker, and above all, he wasn't afraid. But war doesn't respect merit. In May 1811, during an action in La Solana, Juan Ramon fell in combat. He was killed by the French in a nighttime shootout. There was no time to recover him. They buried him right there under some stones. Someone broke the news, and that news traveled by word of mouth until it reached the chapel, to his mother's ears. La Fraila didn't cry in public. She lowered her head, she locked herself in her chapel, and nobody saw her again for days. The town left her alone. La Fraila was no longer the same after she learned that her son had died. Something had broken inside her, but it wasn't sadness or resignation. There was something else. A silent wound that didn't bleed, that couldn't be seen, but that burned. The people in the village started to avoid her. She was no longer just the woman who took care of the hermitage. She was a shadow wrapped in a habit, with dry eyes and her back straighter than ever. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She didn't cry. She just waited. And one day they arrived. 100 French soldiers in retreat, They had fought near La Solana, probably the same ones who had been in the skirmish where his son died. They came dirty, wounded, exhausted. Some dragged their feet, others barely spoke. They carried gunpowder, weapons, and supply wagons. They were looking for shelter before retreating toward Manzanares. They were directed to the Hermitage of Consolacion, a secluded, solid building, with water nearby and enough space to spend the night. La Fraila saw them coming from afar, raising dust on the road. She did not tremble. She left the door open and went out to meet them. The French officer asked her for shelter in the chapel. She nodded. She didn't say a word. She opened the door for them. She showed them inside. She offered them water, hard bread, even a little wine that was left in a hidden jar. The Frenchmen relaxed. They didn't expect an old woman alone in the countryside to resist. Some of them fell asleep on the benches. Others sat down to tend to their wounds. The officer ordered the gunpowder to be unloaded and stored in the back, behind the altar. La Fraila silently observed everything, every movement. She recognized the uniform, the one worn by those who killed her son. Maybe they were there, among them, or maybe not. It didn't matter. They were the same enemy. Each one of those men had made Juan Ramon's death possible, and she wasn't planning to let them get out alive. Night fell at the chapel. All you could hear was the creaking of the beams and the wind banging against the shutters. The soldiers slept, believing themselves to be safe. La Fraila moved like a shadow among them. She gathered scraps of grease, old wood, rags, and soaked them in oil. She prepared wicks. She placed the boxes of gunpowder closer to the altar. She barred the doors. She sealed the windows. And she stayed there, next to the barrels, with a lit torch in her hand. There is no witness to what she thought at that moment. Maybe she prayed. Maybe she spoke to her son as if he could hear her. Maybe she asked God for forgiveness for what she was about to do. Maybe she just waited to be sure everyone was asleep. Then, without trembling, she lowered the torch. The explosion was heard for miles. The sky over La Mancha lit up as if hell itself were burning. The chapel was blown to pieces. Its lime and stone walls were shattered. The nearby trees caught fire, and the bodies of the French soldiers were buried under the rubble. None survived, not a single one. The nun died with them. He left no letters, no words, no witnesses, only fire. The next morning, the neighbors came, alerted by the noise. What they found was a smoking crater where there had once been a chapel, charred bodies, remains of uniforms, and among all that, the shreds of the nun's habit. They didn't ask any questions. They knew what had happened. They silently understood everything. Someone covered her with a blanket. Someone else said she should be buried as a heroine. But there was no burial. There was no mass. Not even a name on stone. Only memory and fear among the French. Because since that day, no detachment ever stopped in Valdepeñas again. After the explosion, everything changed. The news spread the way fear spreads. Fast, distorted, but with an undeniable truth at its core. A single woman had killed 100 French soldiers in one blow. Without an army, without a guerrilla force, armed only with their rage. That wasn't just revenge, it was a message. And the French understood it perfectly. Just weeks later, the Imperial Army began to leave the Valdepeñas and Aberturas area. It was no longer safe. Patrols were afraid to enter the villages. The roads became traps. And the French learned that, in La Mancha, death could be waiting for you in the most sacred place. Because if an old woman could blow you up in a chapel, who was safe? For Francisco Abad Moreno Chaleco and his men, La Fraila's action was a brutal inspiration. No one in his group forgot what happened. In their ranks, they spoke of her in hushed tones with respect. They didn't know her real name. It wasn't necessary. She was La Fraila, and that was enough. Valdepeñas became, thanks to that gesture, a symbol of absolute resistance. It was not a besieged city nor a military stronghold. It was a town where a woman said, "Enough," and she dragged 100 enemy soldiers to hell. That remained engraved in the collective memory. In popular songs, in tavern tales, in the stories told to children by the warmth of the brazier, whenever someone asked why the French no longer came around there. But the official history, as always, forgot her. There are no plaques in her honor. There are no streets with her name. She doesn't appear in the textbooks. No one wrote an anthem. No politician honored her memory. Spain, so prone to glorifying its own when it suits, didn't know what to do with someone like her. How do you classify a woman who sacrifices herself by killing 100 soldiers? Heroine or murderer? The system preferred to remain silent, to forget, let his name fade away with the smoke of gunpowder. But people didn't forget her. Not then, not now. Each generation had its own way of telling her story. In some villages, she is portrayed as a vengeful saint, a mother who offered her life as a sacrifice. In others, as a sacred demon, a woman who brought justice when men gave up. In some places, they call her the mad woman of the hermitage, as if trying to justify what they don't dare to admire. But the truth is simpler and more powerful. La Fraila was a Spanish mother whose son was killed, and they paid for it. In her loneliness, she found a way to make history. Raw, brutal, definitive. Today, more than 2 centuries later, her act still shakes us. It wasn't an act of madness. She thought about what she was going to do. She weighed every step. She knew when and how, and she did it without trembling. Can a single gesture change the course of a war? In Valdepeñas, yes. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. That in a war that seemed lost, it was a woman without an army who reminded an entire empire that Spain does not kneel. That here, even the last old woman with a lantern is capable of bringing justice. That as long as there is memory, La Fraila did not die in vain. That it still burns.
Now you know the story of these 3 people who gave their lives to preserve the legacy of this country. Don't forget them.